To all of my wonderful colleagues in government who were mentioned, it's been such an honor and a privilege to work closely with them on your behalf as we move forward during these complicated times. And above all else, of course, I'm thankful for you, the people of the 8th Congressional District, for once again giving me the honor and the privilege to serve you down in Washington. This is the beginning of my 3rd term, and once again, I will serve on the House Judiciary Committee and the House Budget Committee, where I will continue to fight hard for social and economic justice on behalf of working families, middle-class folks, and senior citizens in our community. Last December, I was also elected by my colleagues in the House to serve as the co-chairman of the House Democratic Policy and Communications Committee. In this capacity, I will be a member of the House Democratic Leadership Team with responsibility of helping to guide our messaging and policy arm. It's an honor to have been given this responsibility on your behalf in such a time as this. Now, we are gathered here today less than a week after the inauguration of Donald Trump as the 45th President of the United States of America, left to ponder the question, what do we do now that the unthinkable has occurred? There's some folks down in Washington, D.C. who want us to step back, but I'm here today to make it clear we plan to fight back. And the first order of business is to deal with the extreme nature of Donald Trump's cabinet nominations. Over the last 18 months, he promised to stand up for hardworking individuals, but many of his cabinet nominees have spent a lifetime enriching themselves at the expense of everyone else. This is a president who talks the talk, but it's not clear to me that he's willing to walk the walk. His proposed labor secretary doesn't support a minimum wage increase or overtime pay. His proposed education secretary wants to privatize the public schools. His proposed treasury secretary once ran a foreclosure factory and kicked thousands of hardworking Americans out of their homes. His proposed health and human services secretary wants to end Medicare as we know it. His proposed HUD secretary has no relevant housing experience. His proposed energy secretary doesn't think the energy department should exist. And his proposed secretary of state is best friends with Vladimir Putin. You can't make this stuff up. We have a reality show host in the White House masquerading as president of the United States of America. Now, some of these folks down in Washington, they say, why don't you give the new president a chance? Can you imagine? This is the same group of people who declared war on Barack Obama on day 1 of his presidency, but they want us to give a reality show host a chance. These are folks who accused Barack Obama of exceeding his authority on January 20th, 2009, the moment the president first put his hand in the air and took the oath of office. Give him a chance. I hear my sister Yvette Clarke over there. Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, declared that his top objective was to make Barack Obama a one-term president. And though he failed in that regard, the obstruction that followed took place in the midst of 2 wars and the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. Yet despite the fact that Barack Obama did not receive an ounce of cooperation from the other side, I'm here to say he did a tremendous job under difficult circumstances with enemies all around him. And America is a better place today because of Barack Obama. Let's just check the record. When Barack Obama came into office, this country was a mess and on the verge of total collapse. Housing market, a mess. Stock market, a mess. Automobile industry, a mess. Banking industry, a mess. 401ks, a mess. When Barack Obama came into office, this country was a mess and on the verge of total collapse. But thanks to his leadership, he turned the situation around. Under 8 years of George W. Bush, this country lost 650,000 jobs. Under 8 years of Barack Obama, this country gained more than 15 million jobs. The stock market was at 6,000, now it's over 18,000. The unemployment rate was over 10%, now it's under 5%. The deficit has been reduced by more than $1 trillion, and over 20 million previously uninsured Americans now have health coverage, all as a result of this president. I came to say America is a better place today because of the leadership of Barack Obama. And so these folks down in Washington have zero credibility on the issue of lecturing us about presidential etiquette, because he did it without an ounce of cooperation from the other side. These folks have now said to us, give him a chance. Our message is that we will decide what the rules of engagement are when it comes to the new president of the United States of America. Someone who spent 5 years delegitimizing his predecessor and perpetrating the lie that Barack Obama was not born in the United States of America. He then ran one of the most divisive campaigns in our nation's history. And so the burden is not on us, it's on the new president to bring this country together. And he can start by getting some of his most extreme supporters like Jeff Sessions and Steve Bannon under control. Now, I'm not here to say that every American who voted for Donald Trump is a racist, but I do know that every racist in America voted for Donald Trump. And so the question is not whether we're prepared to work with him. The question is whether he's prepared to work with us. He didn't win the popular vote. He lost the popular vote. A majority of Americans didn't vote for him. They voted against him. He's nothing but an electoral college president who lacks the mandate for dramatic change. Now, he may try to turn back the clock, but we've got to continue to build upon the progress that has been made over the last 8 years and keep America moving forward. Now, it's reasonable to ask the question, how can we effectively fight back when Washington Republicans control the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives? But we've been down this road before. This is not the first time that we find ourselves in a difficult spot after a period of hope and change. Civil rights movement witnessed victory after victory. The 1964 Civil Rights Act effectively eradicated Jim Crow. The 1965 Voting Rights Act opened up our democracy to everyone. The 1968 Fair Housing Act targeted discrimination all across the land in the housing market. But then that year, everything changed. In April, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. And then 2 months after that, our Senator, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., was assassinated in California after winning the presidential primary. And then a few months after that, Richard Nixon was elected as President of the United States of America. A period of hope and change, followed by a dramatic turn in a different direction, and the prospect of doom and gloom. But history tells us that we overcame Richard Nixon. We overcame Ronald Reagan. We overcame George W. Bush. If we stick together, we can also overcome Donald Trump. But here's the thing, don't agonize, organize. Some of you are going to have to get off the sidelines and get in the game. Don't agonize, organize, and we can also defeat Donald Trump. Now, some folks have said that Donald Trump came into office promising to drain the swamp. But the last time I checked, he's a living, breathing conflict of interest. He's got problems. His cabinet nominations have problems. The White House has problems. The Trump Foundation has problems. The Trump Organization has problems. He's a living, breathing conflict of interest. And so if Donald Trump wants to drain the swamp, here's my suggestion. You should start at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And the rest of us, we're going to build upon the values and principles that have made us an exceptional nation. Government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Equal protection under the law, liberty and justice for all. A country that provides for the poor, works for working families, makes sense for the middle class, and stands up for senior citizens. A country that innovates in the inner city, strengthens suburban communities, and revitalizes rural America. These are the principles that have made us an exceptional nation and will help guide the way forward for our movement. Rise of the resistance. As we move forward, we're going to continue to stand up for progressive values, like fighting against the gun violence epidemic that continues to plague our country. That's what Ken Thompson would have wanted us to do. You know, America, we have 5% of the world's population, but 50% of the world's guns. It is estimated that there are more than 300 million guns in this country, many of them in the hands of criminals that make their way up the I-95 corridor from the Deep South into our communities. Now, so far in Congress, we've been unable to pass comprehensive background check legislation or take other measures as a result of stiff Republican opposition that would have helped to keep these guns out of the hands of criminals and alleviate some of the bloodshed. But that's why Democrats have been compelled to resort and take dramatic action. Last summer, you may remember, we conducted a sit-in on the floor of the House of Representatives and shut down the institution for more than 24 hours to raise up the issue of gun violence prevention and make it clear to the American people who was responsible for the failure to take action. And the Washington Republicans are still upset with us for challenging the status quo and business as usual. They are still upset with us for highlighting the fact that so many of them function as wholly owned subsidiaries of the National Rifle Association, as opposed to doing the people's business. Many of them still ask the question, Why would sitting members of Congress conduct a sit-in on the floor of the House of Representatives? Well, I stopped by today to give them the answer. We sat down so that democracy could stand up. We sat down so that truth could stand up. We sat down so that common sense could stand up. We sat down so that righteousness could stand up. We sat down so that justice could stand up. We sat down so that public safety could stand up. We sat down to make it clear that we will not rest until every single person in the United States of America can leave their home without fear of being struck down by a stray bullet or gunned down by a mentally deranged individual who should not have had access to a gun. Rise of the resistance. Now, every president since Harry Truman, both Democrats and Republicans, have tried and endeavored to enact comprehensive health care legislation. But they've all failed with the exception of Barack Obama. The Affordable Care Act has made a positive difference in the lives of everyday Americans. As a result of the Affordable Care Act, children with pre-existing conditions like pediatric cancer are no longer at risk of being denied health coverage. As a result of the Affordable Care Act, young people can remain on their parents' health insurance all the way through to the age of 26. As a result of the Affordable Care Act, breast cancer screenings and colon cancer screenings have increased in our community and all throughout the country. As a result of the Affordable Care Act, women can no longer be charged more than men for health coverage simply as a result of their gender. As a result of the Affordable Care Act, seniors on Medicare are paying less for life-saving medication. As a result of the Affordable Care Act, more than 1 million people addicted to heroin or opioids are receiving life-saving substance abuse treatment. And as a result of the Affordable Care Act, hospitals in rural America and hospitals in urban America have begun to thrive. The Affordable Care Act has made a positive difference in the lives of everyday Americans. Now, over the next few months, you're going to hear a lot about repeal and replace. Because Washington Republicans want to destroy the Affordable Care Act. But repeal and replace is a slogan. It's not a solution. And for more than 6 years, we've been waiting for House and Senate Republicans to put forth a credible health care replacement plan. But they have no plan. They have no solutions. They have no vision. They have no ideas. They have no replacement for what health care should look like in America, and that is why the stakes are so high. And so our movement must prepare to stand up for the hospitals in our community, to stand up for the nursing homes in our community, to stand up for the health clinics in our community, to stand up for the doctors in our community, to stand up for the nurses in our community, to stand up for the home health aides in our community, to stand up for Medicare, to stand up for Medicaid, to stand up for the Affordable Care Act, and to stand up for the principle that in America, health care is not simply a privilege, but it should be a right in America. Not a privilege, it's a right. Rise of the resistance. We must also stand up for an economy that works for everybody, not just the privileged few. An economy that puts working families first. An economy that puts middle-class folks first, an economy that puts senior citizens first. Since the early 1970s, the productivity of the American worker has increased in excess of 285%. But during the same period of time, wages have increased by less than 10%. And so the productivity gains of the American worker have not gone to the American worker. There are several structural reasons for this unacceptable gap that we must put front and center and confront. These include globalization, the decline of the unionized workforce, the rise of automation, and free trade agreements that work for multinational corporations but don't work for the American people. Thankfully, there are some things that we can do to build upon the economic progress that has been made over the last 8 years and keep the American dream alive and well. We should increase the minimum wage to $15 per hour because a rising tide lifts all boats. We should expand the earned income tax credit to make sure that working families are the ones who benefit from any tax reform that takes place in Washington, D.C. We should change the cost of living formula for Social Security recipients to make sure that senior citizens can finally receive a meaningful increase in their monthly Social Security check. There are things that we can do to build upon the economic progress that has been made over the last 8 years and keep the American dream alive. But here's the thing. We know the road ahead will not be easy. Barack Obama has left the building. And there are some folks down in Washington who are going to try to take advantage of the situation. Some of these folks are so-called compassionate conservatives. They go to church and they pray on Sunday. And then they come to Washington and they prey on the American people the rest of the week. Prey on the poor, prey on the sick, prey on the afflicted, prey on the helpless, prey on the hopeless. They go to church and they pray on Sunday. And then they come to Washington and prey on the American people the rest of the week. Barack Obama has left the building. And there are some folks in Washington who are going to try to take advantage of the situation. But the Old Testament reminds us that when Moses left the building, he also left behind the Joshua generation. And it's time for the Joshua generation in this country to rise up, take the baton, and continue to stand for what is right in America. If they want to cut taxes on the middle class. If they want to build infrastructure, build schools and not prisons. If they want to construct a wall, build it on the Canadian border. Because I know a whole lot of Americans who are trying to get out of town because of the election of Donald Trump. It's time for the Joshua generation. I'm talking about white folks and black folks, Latinos and Asians, gay and straight, men and women, Christians, Jews, and Muslims. It's time for the Joshua generation to rise up, take the baton, and continue to stand for what is right, what is fair, and what is just in America. Rise of the resistance. Abraham Lincoln once observed that when it comes to presidential policy making, public sentiment is everything. With it, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. And so our job over the next year is to help shape public sentiment in a manner that is consistent with what is good for our community, our city, and our country. One of the great honors that I've had to serve in the United States Congress is the opportunity to spend time with some legendary members like Representative John Lewis. You know that he's an iconic civil rights hero. and someone who spent a significant amount of time with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., one of his closest allies. John Lewis was called by Dr. King, he tells us often, the boy from Troy. Because John Lewis was from Troy, Alabama. He almost lost his life on March 7th, 1965, on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, fighting for the right to vote in what has gone down in American history as Bloody Sunday. Now let me say this, John Lewis did more for America on that one day than you know who will ever do in his lifetime. When I first got to the floor of the House of Representatives, John Lewis called me over and asked me a few questions. He said, are you the new guy? I said, yes, sir. Everybody with respect calls John Lewis sir. He said, you from Brooklyn, right? Now I was tempted to say, Brooklyn is always in the house. But instead I said, yes, sir. And he said, well, I'm hearing great things about you, but Washington, D.C. can be a tough place. And so I don't want you to get into any trouble unless it's good trouble. I've thought about that often because, you know, folks like Dr. King and John Lewis and A. Philip Randolph and Rosa Parks and Shirley Chisholm and Adam Clayton Powell Jr. and Whitney Young and Roy Wilkins and so many others were often viewed as troublemakers because they challenged the status quo in order to make a difference in our society. And I've come to conclude that when you're in the midst of a storm, and if you want to turn the situation around, sometimes you've just got to get into some good trouble. The Montgomery bus boycott, that was good trouble. The letter from a Birmingham jail, that was good trouble. The March on Washington, that was good trouble. What took place this past Saturday, that was good trouble. Shutting down the floor of the House of Representatives in a sit-in, that's good trouble. Standing up to Donald Trump whenever and wherever he crosses the line and acts a fool, that's what I call good trouble. We're going to fight him whenever and wherever he crosses the line. Fight him in Congress, fight him in the courts, fight him on television, fight him on social media, fight him in the streets, fight him on radio, fight him whenever and wherever he crosses the line. Yes, we've been knocked down, but I've learned that a knockdown is very different than a knockout. We can get up. We can move forward. We can continue a long, majestic march toward a more perfect union and make sure that this is a country where everybody succeeds. God bless you, and God bless the 8th Congressional District.